All right. Well, today is July 16th, and today's BTI Live number four is our marketing deep dive, building demand for Biotools products. And this is my first formal webinar of the season since I missed the last one and the others were joint, but excited to be here and to talk today with our panelists and dive into this topic. It's always an important and fun one. Um, and I would say in my experience as well, probably for a lot of the people in this room, the technical stuff is what you're good at. It's fun, it's easy, you get a quick feedback loop, it works or it doesn't, you're building a product. The marketing sometimes feels more like self-evident or it's going to take care of itself or whatever. And I've always found that it's much harder than it seemed like it should be. And so this is going to be a great one. But I'd like to bring on our panelists today. And before I kind of let them give their introductions to you guys, just a few notes on the format. We're doing a new format this time. We did it some last year, but this one we are doing it as well. So we are going to be doing an hour of panel talk, guided with the group. And then at the hour, we're going to stop the live recording. And we're actually going to, instead of taking additional questions in the private session, we're going to let each panelist own a breakout room. And we'll talk about what those are as we get to that point. But you'll be able to pick a room and join that room to continue the conversation with our panelists. So with all that being said, let's start with Courtney. Courtney, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Courtney Jackson. I work at Illumina, and I have been a scientist and moved to the marketing space over time. So, I really am passionate about helping science have a great market fit. And I have launched many different clinical as well as research diagnostics and partnered with various startups in different fashions. So, super excited to be here.
Thanks, Courtney. And Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Michelle Yannetti. I am currently with Evident Scientific, which is a microscopy company that just recently divested from Olympus. I have about 25 years in marketing, previously with organizations like Thermo Fisher Scientific. And I've been working kind of in a consulting capacity for the last couple of years with smaller organizations like Eurofins and some of the Biotools companies in previous cohorts. So my passion is around similar to Courtney. I have a scientific background, started in research and then moved into the business side. So my passion is really for building teams, being able to build product commercialization and bring amazing innovations to markets. I'm looking forward to talking with you all.
Thanks, Michelle. And last but definitely not least, Paul.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. Paul Dreyer, I'm the CEO of a company, startup company called Noalytic. We're a quickly growing company. My background, like my partners in crime here, is in science and in the development of analytics and software that are utilized by pharmaceutical chemists, and at one point for the use in keeping our country safe with weapons of mass destruction. So, but I fell in love with marketing and actually went back to school in part of the process because I saw the sheer power of making sure you get your marketing right from the beginning and understanding your customers. So, and it's paid off. It's paid off greatly over the years with respect to not only the adoption of products, but also if you're building a company, you need to be able to think about the marketing that you do to your investors. And that's really paid off in spades over the years. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And just a few other notes. So Paul was a finalist last year at the competition. So he was great to see him on stage. He's got a great pitch and a great company. The breakout rooms, I forgot to mention this, but the breakout rooms, we are not able to live stream. And so we are recording this. It will be going on the website like the other ones, but this one specifically is not live streamed because we can't do that with the breakout rooms. And as well, if you have questions, I don't see our Q&A box enabled right now, so just put them in the chat, and I'll try to take questions if you have questions while we're doing the panel. I'll see if I can integrate those. But you can see this is a little different. This is actually more of a Zoom format, a Zoom conference format than the traditional webinar format, so you guys can all see each other. You're all enabled, so all good. All right. With that, let's jump into it. So, you know, Courtney, I think I'd like to kick it off with you. Can you kind of tell us from the big picture view? Many technical founders, I as well, kind of think that marketing begins once you've got a product to sell. And you've been involved in a lot of different companies, a lot of different product launches. How do you see marketing, and how does it fit into the greater product strategy?
Sure. Yeah. So, marketing, it begins with customer discovery. So right out of the gate, right? It's great to have someone on your team wear that marketing hat. You may not have an official marketer till maybe more maturity with your company, but there's so many resources out there for you to learn from. So it really does begin with customer discovery and asking the right questions, right? So I definitely go by the 20-80 rule. Listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. So that's just reinforcing you really want to listen and understand your markets, understand your best fit. I think something else I really like to use is the mom test approach. I don't know if you guys have read that. It's a great book by a startup founder, but it helps you understand it's not about your pitch and pitching and getting positive feedback about your product. It's about knowing your market, asking questions about the past, really trying to understand the needs and what the market is looking for. And then you can decide maybe how your solution fits. So I think there's a lot of things that start so early that you want to be thinking about marketing and knowing your customer, right? Marketing is really knowing customers and helping drive and change their behavior. So it's all about listening and knowing your customers.
Thanks. Michelle, can you tell us about your perspective on it? And do you have any frameworks that you sort of look at when you're thinking about these things?
Yeah, certainly. So I think that just like Courtney said, marketing is really about positioning. Listening is very important. So talking to customers, testing language, making sure that proposed value props that you're putting in place resonate with your customers and market. Where I think from a framework perspective, if you wait until you're kind of ready to sell, you are starting to build credibility when you'd like to be earning revenue. So I think thinking about building your marketing in phases. So before you have, your minimum viable product or kind of in that pre-product space is when you want to start working on your storytelling. You want to start carving out your segments. So where you're going to establish your beachhead and who are the individual buyers. So map out your buyer journey. Understand who you're talking to, not just from a general customer perspective, but individual buyers, your executive buyers, your end user buyers, your financial purse holders, and understand who you're talking to, what messages actually resonate with those customers. Then during kind of just pre-launch, you want to build out your value proposition and positioning and make sure that they are supported with evidence-backed proof points. So it's not just important to understand where your differentiators are, but how can you concretely support those differentiators with evidence and build credibility in that space. And then when you're ready to go into a commercial perspective, that's when you want to start focusing on promotion and attention. So make sure you have sort of a multi-channel approach. You don't want to rely on conferences alone. You don't want to rely on digital alone. You want to make sure that you have a multi-channel approach so that you can touch customers where they are at the time that they're ready to consider a purchase. And then make sure that you're not looking at marketing as an endpoint. You start kind of pre-commercialization. Your focus around understanding is critical, but make sure you're not looking at this as a one and done. You want to continue to kind of optimize and refine as you go.
Thanks, Michelle. And before I get to Paul, Courtney, I want to kick it back to you real quick. I had a friend who used to work at J&J, first in marketing, then in sales. And then he went to some smaller companies. And I remember a conversation. He's like, when I was at J&J, I could just walk into a clinic or an office and they would take my meeting. It was a lot harder when I didn't have the J&J name behind me. You've worked for a variety of companies as well, but how strongly, how do you sort of balance that? Like, is there a lift from the big company, or are there advantages to maybe not having that in a similar way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there definitely are advantages, right? Certain names, in particular like Illumina, right? Market leader in genomics. So if you're looking to get into a genomics conversation, that can really help. But along with that can come bias or stigma or maybe past experiences that those people had with the company that were with other people, right? So I think it's great to have a fresh start. And honestly, I'm a sucker for like cold calling and for putting out a lot of feelers and not using a name or not using a title or things like that. And so it's really about bringing value. And so myself, I do a lot of research about who I'm trying to talk to and connect with, whether it's through platforms, through email, through conferences. I learn everything I can before and craft a very thoughtful approach to how I'll try and get in the door with them. And, if I bring value to the conversation and I'm bringing something interesting that's new to them, it could be a publication, a technique, networking, maybe, relationship building with people like, hey, I know so-and-so, or have you, thought about reaching out to this org or, this. So I've actually found cold calling and not having the name and the institution can be great if you bring value, right? So it can go both ways, and I think you have to be really smart about when you're using the name of the power behind a company versus truly trying to maybe almost have a blinded conversation, right? When you think about like single or double blinding, there's ways to do market research where you want them to know who you are, and there's times when you don't want them to know your background. So you can think about it like that too. You might get way more honest feedback or honest conversation without having the company attached to that. So, a thoughtful approach.
Thanks, Courtney. And Paul, how do you think about it? When did you start marketing for your company?
Right from the very beginning, we had developed a really cool and patented a really cool technology that seemed to have a great answer for the pharmaceutical industry. But you really have to make sure that, the pharmaceutical industry is great, big, and giant. And if you're trying to offer an analytical technology, you got to have a beachhead to grow from. You have to find the place where the biggest need is. So you go and you talk to those people, and you know what? Nowadays, it's so wonderful with teleconferencing like we're doing right now. You can do a 30-minute meeting and really learn if you're going to hit where the product was. And we experienced that with this company. We went out and really thought we were going to be closer to an analytical tech for production or process R&D. Every single process R&D person we talked to said, boy, these clone selection people would really, really love to have this kind of product. And it ended up being I don't know, it was like the hidden golden egg or something, because it turned out that, we're being paid per assay the customer, we're making a consumable. And while in process R&D, they were probably doing, a normal lab was doing 500 assays a week. You went into clone selection and they were doing 2,000 a week. So we quadrupled our target market just that quick, just by doing a little bit of good market research and understanding what they wanted.
Great. Paul, I know you may get to this too, but I love your analogy for your company. We were talking about this in the prep session. Can you share with us your company tagline and how you use that to communicate both to investors and to your customers?
Thanks, Jim. This is a fun story. So, excuse me, our scientist, Dr. Fred Rainier, is a truly world-renowned analytical scientist. He's, rated in the top 20 by people that rate these things and by their peers and everything. So we're going out to raise money. So here's your little marketing thing that we should have done ahead of time. And we put this great presentation together. It had all this technology and everything else, but this is seed round, right? So most of the people we're going to talk to, they've made their money. Oh gosh, we have one big investor that he made his millions off of building garage doors, and another one building the whistle that the referees make in excuse me in college sports. And so we're trying to talk all this technical stuff, and we're not getting commitments for investments. And so Fred and I are sitting there trying to figure out what are we going to do to fix this thing. And Fred, he says to me, he says, "Well, Paulie says it's just like the canaries." I said, "What are you talking about, Fred?" And he said, "Well, Paulie says, what does a canary do in a coal mine?" And I said, "Well, we I said, they smell for poisons." And he said, "Well, what do we do?" And I said, "Well, we smell for poisons in a bioreactor," which a bioreactor is essentially a fermenter. So we came up with a tagline for the company, "The Canary and the Fermenter." And all of a sudden, every single investor that we talked to, that we explained, "Hey, this is what our technology does. It's just like that canary in the coal mine." We started getting checks written like you'd never believe, because we learned what the audience wanted to, or how we could explain to the audience in simple terms what we did.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So we have a question from the cohort here, which is, as a BioTools startup enters commercialization, when should messaging shift from the technology itself to customer outcomes, business value, and ROI? Michelle, would you mind kicking us off on this one?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I would actually reframe it. You shouldn't have started talking about the technical from the get-go. So you want to be talking about your customer benefit. You should know your customers so well that you understand their challenges, and your messaging should be focused on not just a benefit. I think a benefit value statement is acceptable for marketing, but it's acceptable for marketing 10 years ago. We don't talk about features and translate that to benefits anymore. We now talk about outcomes. So it's not about your features. It translates beyond the benefits that those direct features provide, but it goes directly to what is the exact customer outcome that you are looking to achieve for that customer. So customers today, they would like to see an inverse communication. They want to start with the outcome, understand how the product benefits got them to that outcome, and then they'll look at the proof points that are kind of those verifiable, evidence-based pieces of technical support that support those benefits and ultimately deliver the final outcome. So you want to start talking about that from the beginning, not consider switching to that at some point in your messaging journey.
Can you give maybe just a quick sort of brief example of what you mean in practice?
Let me think about sort of in real terms. So today I work for a company that delivers microscopes. Very old school messaging would have said, we have 10x objectives and we have 100x objectives. And it was up to the customer to understand how did that translate to a benefit for them. The benefit today might be a larger field of view and more area covered, fewer runs, and that might give you a direct benefit of that optical solution. But we really want to tell them, and when we start with the outcome, is get through samples faster. And so when you have a get through samples faster as your original message, then you layer in positioning statements into your kind of core differentiator pillars, and you talk about the ability to scan slides faster and have a larger field of vision. And then you say, and I can support that by showing you the microscopy, optics and Biotools. So I think that you want to invert your message so that you first start with your outcome, you support that by the benefits, and then you back it up with proof points.
Joe. Courtney, I got another question from the cohort here. I'd like you to kind of pick up first. So we are leaving academia mode and close to commercial launch. When is the right time to update brand guidelines, materials, websites? How important is that to change the marketing? And Is it something that we should work with an agency on, or can we do it ourselves with AI? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's situational, really depending on the objectives of your company, right? So startups can be in very different phases and have very different objectives. And it also probably depends on your budget. So I don't want to give a one size fits all answer, right? It can be expensive to work with agencies. However, if you're in that phase and that is going to make all the difference, and you're going to get a lot of great accounts and revenue, then it's worth the investment, right? So I like to suggest, do your work first up front, start with AI, see how far AI can get you. And there's so many amazing AI tools, and we might go into that later, that are pretty minimal investment. And you can learn so much these days from all the great resources and tools available on the internet. So I always say start yourself. And then if you believe you need to go to an agency, how you might know to do that is take what you've built and test it with your key customers, whether those are your alpha sites, your beachhead, your first adopters, early adopters. I'm sure they'd be happy to provide feedback. Customers love to give feedback, and how's the brand resonating with them? How's the look and feel? Is the reach there? Is the messaging on point? You can do some of that yourself to understand, ooh, this is meeting the mark, this is way off, right? And then you can engage agencies, and there's so many different types at different budget levels to help you refine. But again, I'd say start first yourself.
Any other thoughts, Paul or Michelle?
I can add on to that just a little, and I think Courtney, that was a great answer. I think that starting with AI is a nice way to get an 80% out the gate. Do some testing in AI as well. So once you kind of work on building your guidelines and building your visual and look and feel, test that with AI as well. You should be able to know your customers well enough to build a series of personas that you can kind of give that test to the part of your buyer center, and then test those messages and visuals with a synthetic set of audiences with AI. But my suggestion is don't try to go to an agency without having talked to someone that you know in marketing. And there are enough potential advisors within the Biotools ecosystem that you can tap into and say, can you help me? What is the kind of agency I'm looking for? You wouldn't expect your marketers to be able to drop into a lab and design a study. Same way, you shouldn't be trying to design a marketing program, nor should you be trying to tap into agencies. Tap into the experts that have lived this for decades and can help advise you into what kind of an agency. Sometimes it's an individual consultant that could help you more than an agency, and agencies can get expensive quickly.
Thanks. And I would say from the entrepreneurial perspective too, and Paul, maybe you feel similar or different, but it always comes down to time as being the most precious resource. And when you're still early, obviously money is also a precious resource. So you got to make that balance. But it seems to me like as you kind of get more resources underneath you, you have time and a lot more things to do. So you just got to think about where you want to focus and put your efforts and energy. All right. So I'd like to switch over here. So Paul, maybe you could kick us off here. Many biotools companies compete in crowded markets. How does a founder clearly communicate what makes their solution different and why their customer actually needs it? What do you think about that?
That's good. It's a great question. And, it all boils down to, from the very, very beginning, getting your product, positioning statement and your value propositions, just nail them down. When you nail them down in a crowded market, the old 40% rule of whether or not your product market fit is hitting, you'll find that 40%. And what does that do for you? It does two things. Number one is it says, instead of looking at this big crowded market and going after it, here's 40% that really would like to hear and learn about you. So you can take all those energies and resources and time that you were mentioning, Jim, and focus it on squeezing it down to the place where they really, really want your product. And that again goes back to the early discussions that were mentioned earlier of getting that early market research done very, very well so that you know what, pardon me, you know what the value proposition is and what that product positioning statement is.
Okay. Anybody else?
I can add one thing. I think make sure you know, I mean, at this point, I guess we're layering in. You know what your product is and what it does. You know what your customers, who your customers are and what they're looking for. In a crowded market, you need to know your competitors better than they know themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You also need to understand what are the current solutions or current approaches the client is doing today to get to the end result answer that your product can deliver. And what are the switching costs from moving from what they're doing today to what you're offering? Understanding the barriers, understanding the concerns that a client might have about moving forward from their status quo, which requires no inertia, to moving to your solution, which will require probably some hurdles to jump over. Understanding what it'll take to get them there, and making sure that you are very clearly positioned about what is differentiated about your product from what they're doing today and from what any other competitor could offer.
Michelle, it's funny you say it that way. I think back to some other conversations I've had in the past about like competition and marketing and those things. And you ask people who their competitors are, and you always get a list of companies, of services, of things out there that are direct competitors. But one, I think a lot of people miss is no solution, no answer. We're just going to not bias. We're not going to go with anybody. And that's also like in its own way competition, right?
Well, I had a prior colleague who always used to say doing nothing is a choice.
Yeah.
Has to be considered as part of the choice set.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So kind of again, positioning differentiation, Courtney. A lot of our companies have products that have multiple use cases, and that's actually one of the big things we work on in the Accelerator is trying to find like what is the right product market fit for the technology in the company. But for a product that has a lot of different uses, market applications, things like that, how do you go about segmenting, prioritizing those so that the message isn't diluted across your channels and segments?
Yeah, and I think we'll double click on that in the session after, but maybe just a short bit on that. So I'm a sucker for a good old segmentation map. And if you need support in how to create a segmentation map, right, where you're looking at a set of variables that are important for your decision making to define segments, right? That could be the type of institution, the budget they have, reimbursement, all sorts of things, right? So really creating a map and seeing, okay, this is the world that I'm living in. There are so many different segments, and then being able to have a set of criteria for prioritization and saying, okay, I have a weighted scale and here are the 5 criteria that I'm prioritizing on. And hopefully that is something that is accessible to you, right? You need to know your technology. It can actually serve the need and access that segment. And then starting simple, like I think Paul mentioned, right? Start with the beachhead, start with what you think is the biggest opportunity and the best fit for your product, but have that map available. So if your beachhead's not working, you can go adjacent, right? You can go right, you can go left, and you understand what the landscape may look like. So I had an experience in working with a startup where they had a cool genomics tool, that could fit many different markets. There was, direct to consumer through Amazon. There was working with large corporations. There was working with, different medical corporations. There were so many ways. And the company was trying to serve all of them, right? And so I saw this very diluted kind of plan around like, I'm going to try and serve everyone. And we're going to see what works. We're going to spray and pray. We're going to throw spaghetti at the wall and see. And what that did is that creates a burden on the resources. It can create burnout, right, for the team trying to do all these things. Whereas if you had that map and you said, okay, I know all these things could be possible. Now let's double click and zoom in. Let's start with the beachhead. We're not going to start with 5 different channels, right? We're going to prioritize. And to me, it seemed pretty clear. And I think the company did get it after a couple of years where the biggest opportunity lay, right? But if they wouldn't have put all the investment and tried all these different channels at the same time, they could have gotten to their revenue goals quicker and easier by being focused. So I think, again, having that segmentation exercise complete and having that map you go back to every day that's what we do in large corporations too. It's the source of truth, and you focus. You don't want to be spread all over the place. So
everybody struggles with this.
Yeah.
easier said than done, right?
Well, and
Absolutely.
another thing and Courtney, that was such a great commentary. And the other thing that comes into this is, remember, when you define that beachhead, there are different messages for different layers of the organization you're going to. We had a perfect example of that. That was a great outcome for us from Biotools Innovator, and that was, we thought we were living large because every scientist we went to and talked to and told them about how cool it is that you don't have to do sample prep. And they're like, oh, praise the Lord, I don't have to do sample prep anymore. When you carried that message to the departmental managers or a level above that in it, they didn't care about sample prep. And we were taught at BioTools Innovator, and one of our mentors, Steve O'Connor, what a great guy. He said, Paul, he says, those managers don't care about sample prep. They care about workflow. And they need to have their workflows simplified. And that's what your product does. Man, we started using that when we talked then to the departmental managers. We got invited back to talk more about it. So it's really critical that positioning, that value proposition changes depending on who you're talking to.
And Paul, I think that's a great point, going back to what Michelle had said around personas, right? So within segments you've defined, you have those different personas. Like you said, there's people that drive the decision making, the finance piece, that you need to know who drives the decision making. So like you mentioned, you were talking to people that were like, oh, sample prep, right? But they weren't maybe the decision makers or the ones that in the end could get your product in the door and get that signed and that check out the door, right? So it's the decision makers in defining those personas. And there's so many tools to help you do that within those segments, and then craft the messaging, the targeting, the positioning, right? So it's a whole process, which hopefully everybody has started or has some kind of a marketing plan. Again, that was another piece of advice to the startup that I was working with. Have something. It doesn't have to be a grandiose 50-page marketing plan, but even if it's a 5-slide like core template marketing plan that you're going back to make decisions, like where's your plan, right? Where's your objective? So
Yeah, I think that's great. But Paul and Courtney, really great comments. One of the things that I think is tempting or difficult when you're in the establishment of that beachhead and you're trying to choose if you have sort of multiple applications that you could potentially target and multiple industry you could reach. There's a tendency to go after what you know. And that may or may not be the smartest play for establishing your beachhead. And so make sure that there is some kind of an objective way to score your opportunities and potentially look at a matrix to say, I might know this market best. And that could be one of the variables that you put into your matrix of scoring to understand where you should start. But make sure that you're not favoring what is kind of your known universe over what could potentially be a better beachhead. So some kind of objective scoring to help you understand where should your first target be.
Thanks. And I'm going to keep moving here, but Michelle, before we wrap out this section, I'm curious from you. Can you share what are some of the most common positioning mistakes you see founders make when they're kind of putting their new products into the market?
Great question. I think there are a few. One is, focusing on a feature and a feature benefit kind of vision. Customers care about the technical when they are making a decision, but when they're considering, customers are people. Scientists are people, right? They're also focused on their outcomes more than the benefits at the end of the line. So start there. I think one of the mistakes also that founders make is they want to make their technology seem like the best thing since sliced bread, and they will omit pieces of the puzzle that don't fit that narrative. And so making sure from a positioning perspective, you're not putting on rosy glasses and you are actually talking about your product in a way that highlights its features while not completely suppressing any of the drawbacks. Make sure that you're well aware of where your blind spots are, and you're able to address those with features that work for addressing blind spots in your product, but that you are not kind of glossing over the areas that will become questions, because that will be where customers will dig in if you are not including that or at least addressing that in some way.
We have a question that came in here in the chat I'd like to throw out there because we have kind of glossed over this. But Courtney, can you kind of just lay out what goes into a marketing plan? What kind of sections are there? What actually is that document? What's it comprised of?
Sure. So I come from a strategic planning background, and I think it can be really helpful to use different resources. So one of the books I've loved that's more of a classic is Playing to Win by Lafley. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it lays out a really great framework in a simple downloadable slide, right? That helps you understand what you want to include, right? So the vision, who you want to be, what is the goal for this year, break it down into a 1 year plan. A lot of times you could have a 3 year, 5 year, or 1 year. Maybe you have a midterm, maybe you have that short-term annual operating type plan. Who do you want to be? What's the key objective and takeaway? Is it that you want to grow, revenue? Is you want to get bought? Is that you want to acquire this many new customers, right? There can be such different goals. Then you want to understand where you're going to play, and that would include things like the segmentation. Well, first, the market landscape, understanding your market landscape really well, understanding where you can play, right? The segmentation, the persona building, the ideal customer profile, all of those great things. You have all your product information, and then how you're going to win, right? And so there's so many different layers in that. But again, that where to play, how to win framework is kind of classic. And I think that can be a starting point. So, just you can look at Playing to Win. I like to use that, and then scale from there. And there's different templates and marketing tools that it'll give you that can give you a good start.
Any other favorite tools out there? There's no shortage of marketing books in the world.
I would say one series that I like, especially with dealing with startups, is, and these are old, but they are still relevant today. They're still used today, and people pay money to go to their school, which is the whole Jeffrey Moore chasm theory series, right? Crossing the chasm and into the tornado, and it helps you really set and define the everything from positioning statement in the beginning to targeting and figuring out what the audience is. And they're quick reads, so there's a whole bunch of value propped in there. And even the big giant companies still use a lot of that when they're bringing new products to market.
Okay. Let's transition here to building credibility and authority in the marketplace. So I think, Paul, I'd like to kind of start with you on this one. What are the most effective ways to build credibility and trust with researchers in pharma when you have limited publications and not a lot of brand recognition to your name yet?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there are two portions of that. One is early on when you get somebody that really bites into your product, make them your champion. Give them every chance that they possibly can to not only spread the word within the company, but to support you at conferences or trade shows, or offer to support their efforts in writing a peer-reviewed paper or what have you, because getting that customer recognition, even if they're giving a presentation, not a formal paper and everything, but a presentation at a conference, can bring you so much value, because especially nowadays, those presentations are all recorded. So you get an automatic link towards somebody that counts, that's important, that says, hey, this is a really good product. And we teach our sales, and we even offer it in some of our marketing and ads and what have you, to say, see Dr. So-and-so talking about this technology at this link. And the return on that kind of simple, really direct to customer marketing really comes back to you very, very quickly. So that's the first big one, is getting a champion to stand up for you. The second one is it goes right back to what Courtney and Michelle were talking about, and that is getting that messaging straight and into the beachhead that you're going after. Get that credibility there, because when you get that credibility in one place, now you can go to 2 more and carry it out. And when you get those, then you can carry it out to 4 more. So really concentrate and focus on where you're going when you're really starting to go into the market, especially with a brand new technology.
I love what you put there at the beginning of that, Paul, which was the conference call outs because that leads to inbound opportunities. And, what's the difference in value between an inbound and an outbound sales opportunity?
Yeah, yeah. And it's one of the best ways to measure whether you've got a really good product market fit is how many unsolicited calls do you get on your technology? How many times does somebody say, "Oh, I'm working with this. I want you to meet Jim because Jim's got this great technology that's so cool." You haven't done a thing other than that's confirming that you've got it right.
Right. All right, Michelle, founders keep hearing they should become thought leaders. What thought leadership activities actually create visibility and turn into commercial opportunities versus what just kind of feels productive or is a more of a vanity metric?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I guess to build a little bit on some of the previous comments that Paul made, if you think about, we want to talk about quality over quantity. So you can be in an environment where you have limited publications, you have limited recognition, but it's not necessarily about the volume. So that's when it comes to sort of specificity. So you want to think about how can I build credible case study or data? How did you specifically solve a customer problem? Being able to show you've got the ability to sort of pattern match. Do you understand the customer problem and then demonstrate that with results? That's going to get you better credibility from a thought leadership perspective than a whole host of generic posts. And I think having some of the early successes documented, whether that's through some kind of data, paper, case study, if you can get peer-reviewed publications, of course, that's going to be carrying the largest weight. But you want to show up where buyers already are. If you have the ability to present at conferences, if you have seminars or working groups or local consortia that you can become sort of a known entity, those are the places that you would like to show it has more credibility and you're going to get more out of that dollar for dollar than you would with broader posting, broader advertising. What feels good, but necessarily doesn't buy you much is a lot of social posts on LinkedIn that are in the organic space that don't really add a lot of value. Sort of a Me Too post feels like activity, but it doesn't actually build you any credibility. So making sure that this is you're investing your time in valuable content that is in a room where your prospects already are, and whether you are credentialing your own success or bringing in, like Paul mentioned, kind of borrowing credibility from a known entity, you want to focus on quality and not quantity.
That's great. And I think, one thing you can also think of, you're early on in the game, right? If you're doing alpha or beta or, early adopter sort of activities, part of maybe it doesn't have to always be cash compensation, but maybe there's like marketing compensation, getting quotes, testimonials, put in the paper, those sorts of things are things that I think can be negotiated to help build that value.
We absolutely, just to add on that, Jim, we
Yeah.
have documented, and this is something that initially began in the EU because there are a lot more ability to sort of compensate endorsers, whether they're seen as an endorser or more just a partner. There are values attributed to something like a case study or values attributed to talk at a conference. So when we are, let's say, trading the usage of technology or some consumables, we actually assign values to the trade in support from that customer.
Is that publicly available information, or how do you find that value for yourself?
It's something that typically companies would develop in-house, but because we need to demonstrate that we received something from that partnership, that's a way to document that.
That's interesting.
A good, that was a great point because, when you start partnering up with other folks, whether it's consortiums, like Michelle said, or other groups, there's this multiplying power. So a good example is one of my buddies. She has this company that has a device that produces a lot of data. but they don't, it's a plug and play device, and they don't have a software to go with it. So what she did was she teamed up with another high-end AI software company that was a startup, and the two of them went out in the market with a joint paper. And man, did that make them look really big and powerful. It was a really great way to didn't cost them anything except their time, but it was hugely well spent time.
Right. Okay. We have 15 minutes left. I want to keep it moving. We may come back if we've got time, but we have a bunch of questions from the cohort. I want to kind of transition to more of like the tactical tool execution side of things here. And so one of our questions is, I had a question about timing for a CRM and marketing automation tool. Is there a sweet spot when it comes to timing for when we should implement a tool versus obviously handling it themselves? Any thoughts on that from the group?
So
I
I'll
think
go.
this is,
Oh, go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead, Courtney,
I was
please.
just going to say, so from my perspective, what I've seen is it's time when your customer base warrants it, right? And hopefully earlier than later. And Paul has lived this, I'm sure, many times. But there's tools that are free, low cost. Get going on one. It helps you stay organized. It saves you so much time, your precious time, and keeps you very organized. So I would say earlier with a low cost to free tool. But Paul.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% because a lot of them, they have a great plan for startups like us where it's free in the beginning. You do it, you're building up your database. You can do some fundamental work with it, including, mass mailings and everything else to it. But then as you're watching it, and we're going through this exact point right now, Courtney, so you nailed it on the head, and that is that it's now time for us to make better use of the powers of that particular CRM that we're using. And as a result, we're working with the supplier of that, and it's coming to our benefit because it's heading towards their end of their fiscal year. So we're ending up getting it at a discount for the first 2 years if we sign the contract. So yeah, don't spend the money until you need it, and you'll know when you need it.
Right.
And always negotiate. I think that's a key point, Paul. Don't take face value. Don't take the ASP they give you. Push
Yeah,
back, and there's many reasons and ways to do that. So negotiate.
absolutely.
Great advice there. All right. We got another one. Kai, this is from you. I may need your help on it. It's advice on metrics to track in marketing. I found attribution to be challenging. I'm not quite sure what you mean by attribution, or maybe the panel does, but
Yep.
Any advice on metrics to track?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I will tell you, I've been at Fortune 100 companies that find attribution difficult. So it's not a starter problem.
Can we
It's
define that real quick? When we say attribution, is that like
attribution.
where the
Mhm.
value comes from, like where the marketing activity led to some measurable outcome? Is that the
Yeah. So typically you would have a funnel and it starts with a lead, and that may or may not be qualified. Marketing would then determine if there are buying signals that would determine if that becomes a marketing qualified lead. Then if you have a more advanced organization where there's a commercial team would then accept that lead and convert it into a sales qualified opportunity. And then that would become a won or a lost deal. And if you have a connected CRM system, you have the ability to see how did that lead come in and did that ultimately result in a sale. Very few organizations have an end-to-end connected CRM system that goes from lead acquisition through CRM and ultimately the ordering capability. So they are disconnected usually, as most companies have a little bit of a challenge. And so they look for some kind of an API tool to put above all of the disparate, disconnected systems to somehow show that attribution end to end. And it's difficult because you are trying to massage data from many different systems, one of which might have an account code, one of which would have a lead code, and one of it would have an order code. And they all address a different buyer in the journey because you have an end user, an account, and then some kind of a financial ship to. And so being able to connect all of that end to end can be difficult even in the largest organizations. So I think that's where some of the advice that Courtney and Paul are giving about how to manage and when to implement a CRM system. It's not just about the marketing automation and the communication. It's also how can you measure your marketing success at the end of the day. because you will end up with a point as you go through your growth cycle that you are going to ask yourself, how do we make our bottom line become more reflective of our top line? Where can we cut? And the natural question as you start to grow is, well, maybe we can cut marketing dollars. I'm not seeing a direct attribution from a lead to a final one opportunity. Maybe let's see why don't we pull back on conferences? There's no way to measure that if you don't have attribution.
Anybody else? We're going to do the next question. We still got a lot to get through
Yeah,
here.
Jim, just real quick. So I think that attribution, that's awesome, but maybe you don't need to worry about that in a small startup so much at the beginning, and just look for metrics that are doable, which could be qualified customer conversations, which could be movement in your funnel. Hopefully you understand and have a funnel. It can be simple. And then pilot to paid, right? So you can map out a few true metrics that work for startups versus like a marketing attribution or something. So I wouldn't get into all the fancy highly, there's a lot going on in funnel management, but just pick some metrics that matter.
Yeah.
Next question, and I think we maybe covered this in some of the books, but we'll just be clear with it. Do you have a list of frameworks or worksheets, canvases that you find helpful for things like market segmentation, customer value proposition, buyer profiles? I will start this one myself, but it's not really a perfect answer, but I do like the Business Model Canvas book. It's by Alexander Osterwalder, but it lays out your business model plan, and these are parts of it. But yeah, I think that's my one quick answer for this one. Anybody else? Paul?
I like utilizing stage gate analysis. It has such a good template. It has all the questions that you're asking. It's free and downloadable, and you can just really get yourself captured in a simple way with it. So yeah, that would be
Do you
my.
have a link we could throw in the chat for that, Paul?
I think I can get one. Give me just a second.
Michelle?
It's a great question. I tend to look at things more less of I guess, an off-the-shelf framework, because each business has its own kind of unique criteria and different traits that are going to sort of necessitate you to organize things a little bit differently. I like to have an understanding of a top-line value proposition, buyer segments, and then personas, and then I map those into a database, typically with different situational understanding and stages of the buyer journey, whether it's awareness or consideration or decision. And then I set some algorithm behind it that I can select stage, customer, segment, buyer, and then it will help kind of craft something for me. I think it's really subjective and it depends on your business.
Courtney, anything to add, or we can move on?
Yeah, just a couple quick templates. I like to start with a ghost. So goals, objectives, strategy, tactics. You could, look that up. And then I really like SWOTs. I don't think we mentioned that, but that helps you understand your landscape and your market, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So those are just a couple tools. And then again, that playing to win framework and the strategic cascade, I feel like offer a lot of cool tools. So.
Next question, and for our panelists here, if you feel like you can throw your book reference links in the chat so people have that. That'd be fine. This one is what is the best marketing platform for a company like ours, and how do you actually leverage platforms like Science Exchange or Scientist.com for marketing? Do our panelists, do any of you have direct experience with any of these types of platforms yourself?
For me, it's very limited, although I'm seeing Scientist.com grow. They pivoted a bit from what they were trying to do a couple years ago, to the point that even mid-sized pharma companies are utilizing that to help navigate legal documents that they're going to work through, or excuse me, as well as their plans for purchasing things. So that's about it, though.
Yeah, I used it with my company back in the day, and I found it a great lead for, service opportunities, for kind of a unique thing people would find it. And then I think the other big value I found on these platforms was when working with a bigger company. you are automatically in their approved vendor process list by going through this channel. And so that can actually save like 3 to 9 months of negotiating work and vendor approval processes, which is worth its weight in gold sometimes. So, okay, let's jump into, we've got a few minutes left, but we haven't talked about AI much. But can each of you maybe just quickly discuss, how are you looking at and integrating AI into the work you guys are doing today? How are you doing it? What are you kind of using? How do you think through that? Maybe Courtney, you could start that one for us.
Yeah. So we use AI often every day for many different things. One of the areas that I like to use it for is market research. It's really sped up in terms of doing secondary research. But there's also some great platforms you can use that integrate AI for market research as well. So one of those I've used in the past a lot would be like AlphaSite. That really helps. Alpha Sense, those two platforms for different marketing and research purposes. I know we use AI a lot for helping refine things like development of messaging and positioning. Once the AI is trained to understand, your target segments and landscape and what your products are, so you have to feed and train it, obviously. That is super helpful, but I always recommend test it with real customers and real people. Don't just depend on the AI. It can definitely misguide you. So those are a few things that we do. Creating agents that become almost a new member of your team. I don't know if any of you have experienced doing that, but we're doing that for all sorts of things and seeing really high value and just great efficiency, right? Replacing things that took weeks and now it can take the AI an hour, right? So, but I think, Michelle, you had some great feedback too that you have been using AI for around like the value prop
Yeah.
message and testing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on it. One of the ways that we're using AI, once we've kind of worked through messaging and we have a set of prospective messaging frameworks that resonate internally, have had some strong support with voice of sales, I would then take our personas. So I typically have just generally three buckets that I break out personas. One is sort of your executive decision maker, one is your end user, and then one is sort of a business procurement financial buyer. And you can have sub frameworks that are built into each of those personas, but that's a general persona set. And then I have a set of personas that I have built for different market segments and would test messaging for each of those sort of A, B, and C and ask the synthetic audience to evaluate the messaging, score messaging, both the top line value proposition as well as my message pillars, and tell me which one of these messages would encourage you to try a demo. It's very helpful for getting that next level granular view into synthetic audience and message testing. I think the other place that AI has been really helpful is that sort of grunt early work. So the competitive landscape analysis, understanding what is happening in your market with competitors, whether that's around what are they talking about, like what's the voice of the market, what's the voice of the competition, what's happening in the overall kind of customer conversations. It can comb through a vast amount of data relatively quickly and relatively well, and find some of the areas where maybe competitors' claims are weak, find areas where are becoming kind of hot topics of conversation in the marketplace where you might want to lean in. So I think there's a couple of different places that you can find good use of AI. Just make sure that they are not replacing conversations. They shouldn't replace customer conversations. It shouldn't replace you doing your own market research, but it can give you, early areas to lean in on. Then you support that with kind of factual customer or sales conversations.
I got to be honest, that kind of blows my mind. It's so cool. Like you could set up these synthetic personas, like you said, and then as you're getting real data from customers in these personas, you could feed that back into your model and make us. That's so cool. I love that idea.
Yeah.
Paul, we got to wrap up here soon, but any final?
Yeah, probably two quick ones. Great lessons is make sure you're using an AI that's designed for the subject or the task at hand. So we use, for instance, Notebook LM to convert our patents and some of our big, highly technical articles so that they can be used and transfer that data without it being, you actually, with the LM, you can say, hey, read this and give me 3 versions of explaining it to a person with a high school degree, a person with a technical degree, and a person with an accounting degree. So that's hugely important. With the same reason we don't do strategy, we do different strategy versions. For instance, I use Claude for executive strategy for setting up our partnership programs and understanding our partners better so that we can communicate effectively and feed off of each other. So yeah, that would be the final note, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity, but use for what it's designed, because chat-based AI should never ever be used to make a legal decision. It's just it's kind of crazy. There are plenty of options out there.
All right. Thank you, guys. That ends our formal panel session. I did want to ask a final question, which was any final piece of advice or mistakes that you see companies make that you would suggest they avoid. If we could take like 1 minute each, if you could quickly go around, if you have a final sort of closing piece of advice. Michelle?
Sure. Final piece of advice. I mean, I think we talked about a lot of it. Make sure your positioning's right before you start scaling. Make sure that you have the ability to credential success. Make sure that you have you make sure you talk to more people than you think seems reasonable. I think probably the one piece of advice would be you will get tired of your messaging, your information sooner than anyone in the market will. So make sure that you are over communicating and over conversing in order to make sure that you get to the right place.
Paul?
Yeah, I'd say just for you're all in the BTI network now. Make really good use of that. Take your core group that you're working with, learn from them, and make friends with the other folks. Because I tell you, in the last 8 months since I've been out of that, I've used BTI, if not weekly, every other week to get answers or references or links or networks to talk to. So make good use of it. You've got a hell of a bunch of partners with you.